Hello and welcome to another video. Today with a review for Dragon Age Veilguard after 100%. Now first up, what does 100% mean? I completed every achievement on Steam for 100% and also did some extra work like finding all the treasure and completing all maps to 100%. You can find my Steam profile down in the description box, and this is the first video in this type of series. Now first up, an overview of my thoughts for the game after finishing it, specifically towards the 100%. It was rather easy. You can do this one in roughly 55 to 60 hours. If you decide to go the speed route, you are probably going to see around 37 to 40 hours. You just need to do the side quest for some achievements and find a ton of mementos, but the process of acquiring all treasures, the 100% treasures, on each map was pretty enjoyable anyway. So I did it, especially since it's rewarding you with items that you can mix and match to create new builds and play through the game with those items in mind. Overall, I found this one to be very enjoyable. I would give it a solid 8.5. It is above average in terms of music, environment, exploration is okay. The voice acting is very, very good. Some of the story is very good. Some of the story is, well, awkward at best, and the combat is very solid. However, the game has some issues, like for example, the writing is very inconsistent. Sometimes it's very awkward to listen to conversations. Sometimes the writing just drops off a cliff and disappears in the bottoms of the garbage tier. And sometimes an angel picks it up and elevates it to the heavens because it's so good. Especially some of the companions struck out to me, like for example, Neve was pretty enjoyable. Others like Taj were, well, they just thought about the concept for a character, in this case a non-binary character, and then added some extra stuff on top. Like for example, this character, I will talk about this a little bit more later, but this character is a little bit extra, especially because of the behavior of this character. It sounds like the character is 17 or possibly even 15, 16, somewhere around that. I thought the character just didn't fit the setting. And some minor details like monster variety towards the end. It did get a little bit boring fighting the same monsters over and over again. So for the overview, it's pretty positive. Next up, let's have a look at the technical side. Now, I personally did experience some FPS drops towards the end of the game. The beginning was perfectly smooth. Artland Forest and Treviso as well as Minrathis were perfectly fine. Later on, when the blight hits, especially in some of the later zones, it starts to drop the FPS, like considerably. Instead of 144, I'm looking at around 70, and that's noticeable. It is consistent. I didn't experience any stutters, but the game's performance suffers a little bit later. Now with that out of the way, let's have a look at the story and world building. My thoughts on that are that the game suffered quite a bit during the development process, and it shows. Sometimes I just thought the dialogue was very dry, lacking meaning. Some things just got repeated for the sake of repeating it. So it handled you as being dumb. So it held your hand throughout the whole game. The stakes were dire and the characters just explained it again and again and again and again. They didn't add any tension. They didn't discuss what was happening, just repeated what was happening. However, this is not the case for everything. Great example is Solas. So whenever I talked to him, I just thought the story developed, the characters developed, the exposition was done very, very well. And this is probably because the game was initially centered around Solas. That's why Solas feels nice to talk to and nice whenever he shows up on screen. Other characters are a little bit more shoehorned in. Like for example, Neve has a very nice storyline. Everything works in tandem with the city and shadow dragons, which was very enjoyable for me. Initially, I didn't like her as a character, but she grew on me, especially since the other characters just lost me, in part because I was very much looking forward to Taj and she disappointed me the most. Not because she was non-binary, that's the character that was non-binary, but because the world building just was not there. She as a character was decided to be non-binary and everything else seemed to be built around that. Afterwards, someone came in and thought, how do we put this character into the storyline of Rook, of Veilguard? Well, let's make her a dragon hunter. But this doesn't show throughout her storyline. This felt just particularly bad. So the game is missing world building sections towards the companions that you get later. Like the Lords of Fortune as well as Taj are missing something. The early game and mid game in terms of world building was amazing. Later on, everything falls apart for me at least. Now let's talk about difficulty and combat. The combat for me felt very, very smooth, except for the targeting, which just sometimes sometimes switched enemies and I targeted someone that's not on screen, just the closest enemy to me, or even dead enemies, someone that's not even alive anymore. So that was the only frustrating thing about the combat. Otherwise, it felt diverse. I switched builds 3 times. First I tried a weapon build with the orb and the dagger. Next with the mage I tried the staff, and lastly I tried to focus on something with spells. Everything felt amazing. Now the difficulty, however, is something that needs a little bit more attention, because depending on the build you're playing, the game gets harder or much easier, to the point of trivializing everything. If your build is bad, you're going to suffer with low damage numbers, spongy enemies, and just getting shit on constantly. But if your build is good, you're going to blast through combat encounters, like one-shot enemies for maximum damage. You can tank basically everything the game has to offer. You're invincible, you regenerate mana constantly, you can spam spells constantly, you can get infinite sustain, and so on and so forth. This makes the game, even at the higher difficulties, very easy. There's also enemy aggression tied to difficulty. Like the higher the difficulties, the more aggressive enemies become. They will rush you and you will have very little time to use charge attacks. So charge attack builds felt a little bit off. Very frustrating to play versus a lot of ranged enemies. But melee builds or spell builds that gave you invincibility or hyper armor just felt much better to play. Now, as far as builds and customization for those builds goes, there's a ton you can do here, especially early game. Depending on what you pick on the skill tree, depending on what you pick for skills, depending on what weapons you're using, what armor you're using, you have your unique items, all of that can change your build and make you play completely different to before. Why just the early game? Because the early game is much more limiting what you're getting. Later on, you get so many skill points, you basically fill out the whole board. You pick up everything you want. Later on, I just thought, okay, whatever can I pick to make my build stronger? I don't see anything on the skill tree anymore that interests me. I would make my build better. And that's something that I think is bad game design. I would much rather see in some exclusive choices. Like for example, I can upgrade a skill in one direction or the other. And depending on that, it's going to change the playstyle. Or some nodes with multiple levels. Like for example, charge attack damage plus 10%, 20% or 30%, and at 30% you get AoE on a charge attack or something like that, to make it more interesting and invest in the skill tree. So the complexity is not there. Because of the items and because of everything you can do, it made it quite enjoyable. Now, as for progression, there is 2 progression systems. The first one is mementos, so you can find those mementos all around Thedas or at specific vendors, so you buy them, and the caretaker in the lighthouse is getting upgraded. Now, the caretaker level dictates at what level you find items. This means it is more rewarding to just find mementos, skip the chests, and then come back later. Except it just feels bad, and at some point you're flooded with mats, so it doesn't really matter. You just upgrade the caretaker whenever you can, and upgrade your weapons afterwards. Because some items are, for example, locked behind story. This means whenever you find a weapon, it has 4 traits, or an armor with 4 traits, or jewelry with 4 traits. Sometimes one of the upgrades is locked behind the story. Some of them are locked behind companion stories and in inaccessible levels after you finish that story. Or some of them are locked behind the point of no return in the game. So you get the finishing touches for your build very late. This was frustrating to see, especially since some of the upgrades are very significant, and especially for the super bosses, I would have much rather prefer to get those upgrades before, so I can min-max my character, so I can beat that massive giga boss instead of just rushing the end game, the last chapters after the point of no return. This brings me to exploration and level design. Exploring everything was very fun. There are puzzles which are tied to companion abilities. Those are very fun to solve. Like you need to look around the environment, look around specific sections of a level, and then try to open a door, or try to get a lever, or try to destroy a barrier. And you know when you see a barrier, okay, how do I open this one? I need to destroy red crystals. Where are the red crystals? So you look around the level, try to find it. Or you find a flower on the ground, and this flower specifically unlocks a specific achievement. So you open the map and look at the map and search for small segments of the map that you have not discovered yet. So you remember, oh right, there was blight before. Now the blight is gone. I need to get back, pick up the flower. Then you look at the map again. You have looted the flowers. Where do you go with the flowers? Especially interesting for that achievement. So that I found very, very much enjoyable. Especially since you also unlocked shortcuts and you have to backtrack sometimes because a quest will lead you back to that specific section and you have unlocked that specific shortcut so you can get there faster or it's more convenient to get there. Now, speaking of which, side quests, there are 3 types of side quests. One type of side quest is just to get an achievement or get a specific reward. They are very, very easy to do and have very little dialogue. So you just kill that monster, find that item. Those are the MMO quests. Then you have the town quests or the faction quests. Those are much more interesting. They progress a quest line in that zone. They're not tied to your companions. And those quests are pretty epic. Like sometimes you fight versus a dragon. Sometimes you are treasure hunting in a massive elven ruin. Sometimes you need to clear blight in a zone completely devoid of life. Some characters will comment on that. Like for example, Darwin will comment on specific sections in that level for that Grey Warden quest line. But he's not necessary to progress here. But some characters just tell you, hey, Darwin would probably like to go with you. Put him in the party. So that I found to be very neat. However, companion quests are a different story. Nev's questline, for example, or Harding's questline have more nuanced story. They are interesting to follow. You're shown zones or parts of a city that you have not previously seen. You get a little bit of lore or just an adventure. That's very cool. Like for example, for Nev, it's just a detective story. You need to uncover a very elaborate plotline and it was fun to do. Sure, there is a ton of detective tropes, but it was still fun to do. The characters struggled with the city, with the situation, not with what they are. Harding had that role. She was changed. Something happened to her. So she tries to uncover what happened to her and why she's able to do what she is able to do. And then there is Emric. Emric is also an amazing character, introduced with Darwin. Both characters are great. One is a Grey Warden trying to find the lost griffins. And one is a necromancer that tries to overcome death and become a lich. Those questlines have meaning. And then there is Tash. Tash's questline is not fit to be in the game. Everything about her questline is centered around what she is. The struggle of being non-binary. But nothing else in that whole universe talks even about that. If you do not pick up the mirror at the very start of the game, you don't get any information about this. So her quest line feels completely off. No character talks about that. No character talks about their pronouns. Anything like that in the game. If you do not pick up that mirror and change your appearance or question your appearance. But she's still in the game and tells you Minrathas has a ton of people that they are like her. But you are not confronted with that. You don't see that. So her companion quest feels completely off, especially since she is introduced as a dragon hunter. And we do see something like that, but it's not her struggle. She just does it because she's good at it. So it felt off. I feel like they had written her as a character and then tried to shoehorn her into the story. How do we put her into the universe to make it believable? Just make her a dragon hunter. A muscular woman. Let's go. Done. I just didn't like it. It felt off. Anyway, with that, let's finish up the review with some positives and negatives. So the first positive thing I very much enjoyed is the great music and great sound design. The environments were also very, very nice to look at. Very intricate. The textures were great. The details were very nice to look at. Exploration also felt very nice. Puzzles were simple, but also sometimes complicated. So there was a lot of variety, especially with how many puzzles you had. The voice acting was great in some parts and very awkward in some parts. So I will put this one into the positives because it, for the 90% of the game, was great, but the 10%, not so much. So it's also negative. The same goes for the story. Some of it was really, really good, especially surrounding Solas. But sometimes I just felt like everything felt out of place. The same goes for companions. Some of them felt out of place, some of them were really good. So this one is also split between positives and negatives. And then to finish up on a very nice positive, it's the combat. Very good, very engaging, very smooth to play. As for the negatives, like I said, inconsistent writing, probably because the direction of the game changed. So the parts with Solas were amazing. Some parts of the story were amazing with the gods and everything around the veil. Some of the blight stuff was pretty bad. Like one singular thing that I found very insane to me is blight is supposed to be that all destroying evil. You touch it, you are done. you're blighted. But in this game, some characters were very afraid of it. NPCs mostly. The companions and your character, not so much. This was just bad. And monster variety towards the end was lacking. Would have liked to see some new faces. And lastly, the conclusion. First, let's talk about the 100% part. It was very easy to 100% this game. You can do this one in just one playthrough. You don't need to do any other playthroughs for the secret endings or other endings. The hidden achievements were very easy to grab. I think the hardest one is the one with the flowers, because people just don't know about this one. You just need to find 3 flowers and bring it to an NPC. Nothing difficult about this one. Same with the optional bosses. If you follow the quest lines and follow the very obvious stuff, you're golden. And then there is the secret achievement. The secret achievement for the secret ending is a little bit weird because you need to interact with 3 orbs. There's no indication that they exist. I just scoured everything and found there to be 3. Those you need for the secret ending post-credit scene. So it doesn't change anything for the story. It's just additional stuff. This achievement is very easily missable if you just don't interact with the orbs. And the game also offers you a lot of save points, so you can just, like me, reload an earlier save point if you missed something that is missable. So I had to replay like 6 hours of gameplay. As for the game itself, I think it is very much worth the money. Like for $60, that's a lot of value. 55 to 60 hours for an RPG. It did overstay its welcome by around 5 to 10 hours, I think. Did get a little bit tedious towards the end, but it was still enjoyable, especially for the quest lines for Nev or Harding. The battle system was great, exploring the environments was great, just all around a good solid game, nothing amazing, so no game of the year contender, but also not completely garbage. I think it deserves the 8.5 from me. Anyway, this sums up the video. I hope you liked it. This was the first 100% review on this channel, so if there is any feedback you want to give me, please do so. Otherwise, leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and see you next time. Bye.